Very warm welcome to everyone who has joined us today for this exclusive webinar from various parts of the country. Today, we'll be talking about skilling. The debate around skilling is not new, and especially in the last 1 year. But we want to explore something different, and hence, we'll examine the idea of driving skilling as mainstream to engage a hybrid workforce. Managing a hybrid workforce is also a new phenomenon, and people leaders are coming up with unique ideas and unseen challenges to manage the hybrid workforce. And prioritizing skilling in the hybrid workforce is another major challenge. People leaders must help their employees grasp the key elements of a hybrid work culture, which in turn delivers more work flexibility, facilitates better productivity, and consequently encourages better workforce performance. And today we have senior industry leaders to discuss the same. I would like to welcome Mr. Kamal Datta, Managing Director, Skillsoft India. Welcome to this webinar, Mr. Datta. My next guest for this webinar is Mr. Sachin Narke, Chief Learning Officer and Head Talent Acquisition and Head HR for Forbes Marshall. Welcome to this webinar, Mr. Narke.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. My next guest is Mr. Sujit Sahu, Vice President, Human Capital Development, Triance. Welcome to this webinar, Mr. Sahu.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Before I hand it over to Mr. Datta, I request our audience to please ask your questions in the Q&A box, and please mention the name of the speaker your question is addressed to. And we'll be taking the questions. All our industry leaders will be taking the question in the last 15 minutes of this webinar. Now I request Mr. Datta to take over. Over to you, Mr. Datta.
Thanks, Abid. We have a very interesting topic today. It's about dealing with learning and skills for the future, for a hybrid workplace, given the scenario that we have seen. We have two eminent and experienced professionals with us. So I hope that what I would like to achieve is post this session that you will get some design consideration and broaden your horizon when you have to think about skilling and upskilling of your employees. You will get some practical tips, not only of what works, but also what doesn't, because that's a key element. It helps to get this peer validations from industry leaders so that you don't take any missteps. As you chart your plans or build your journeys for the next year as we see the pandemic playing out. So what I will do is I will share some of the insights we have seen so far, and then rely on Sachin and Sajid for expert guidance, advice, their experience, some best practices, etc. on this. Needless to say, we are, this pandemic has been significantly devastating. So I want to thank every one of you for joining this call, to spend this time with us, and we will try our best to make it meaningful as well as insightful so that you have actionable insights as you leave after 1 hour. Needless to say, I think two of the important lessons was, yes, we need to be more digital than we were previously, but also the fact that we need to be more human in our approach as we deal with organizations, partners, customers, etc. There is a lot of considerations. There are HR is at the forefront dealing with employee wellness, which was the top priority, vaccination drives, workplace safety, health risk because of COVID, mental health, resilience, change and time management. And then there were security risks, which were like data breaches, cyber threats. There were reputational risks around harassment, and there were things around diversity and inclusion. Suddenly, that seems very, very important. And at this middle of all this, you still had business continuity to look after, better collaboration, better productivity, looking at the mindset of your employees and their morals, um, and design your workplace for the hybrid post this pandemic and crisis. The overwhelming sense was that we need to build resilience in both selves and in teams, to endure and thrive during this kind of pandemic. So when we look at organizational resilience, I've spoken to a lot of customers around this. And the overwhelming sense is that it has to be more customer centricity. You need to innovate continuously, even in the times of adversity. That resilient organizations do invest in people and the leaders at the time of crisis, and that they have an advantage of time to market once things become better. So, accelerating innovation, creativity, responding to change with speed, customer centricity in whatever they do, managing their stress, problem solving skills, decisiveness in face of uncertainty, and leading through disruption with mindfulness are some of the key elements of building a resilient self and an organization. So, I want to first start with you, Sachin. What could be the biggest obstacle to the sustainability of a hybrid workforce model, and how they need to be addressed in your mind?
Thank you, Kamal. Uh, yeah, I think the prelude that you set has some of these answers. Uh, to me, there could be two possible obstacles. One is the context itself, the context that has enabled us into this hybrid workforce may become a spoil sport in future, and I will explain to you what I mean by that. And the other one is the style of management, or to say the real style of management that some of us believe in. Coming back to the context, I'm a firm believer that context influences behavior. And we know that information in isolation has limited power to change behavior. Information doesn't really change behavior. If it could, then we all would be exercising in the morning. We have no dearth of information on that front. If information could change people, then there won't be smokers in the world, because it's right there on the case what happens to you when you smoke. But people continue with those behaviors. So information has a limited ability to change behavior. I firmly believe that when you change the context and you provide information, then the behaviors change. And what best example we can have than to talk about certain behaviors that we have seen change during this pandemic. Now we talk about three contexts. One is pre-pandemic context, which was normal, then the pandemic context, which has changed, and then maybe the post-pandemic context. Now, in the pandemic context, we have seen many individuals' behavior changing, and we have seen the reflection in even at the org level, at the systemic level. And this hybrid work that you spoke about, earlier only a few industries were kind of practicing this, but now, talking from my own industry perspective, the engineering or manufacturing industries, they have changed, and we have gotten into this whole hybrid work kind of a culture. So this is one change that has happened because of the context that we operate in. We didn't have a choice, right? Only shop floor members could come, but otherwise we never could believe that, okay, we can work from home for a year, and most of the functions, most of the members can work from home, even in the manufacturing or engineering setup. But now, because we had no choice, because of the context that we operated in, we have learned that. My fear is when we go back to normal, okay, because the context would change, there is a high possibility that we may go back to the old practices, so if we can't, if you fail to identify the good practices, good behaviors that we learned during this pandemic, and we sustain that, then that may become an obstacle. So that I meant by the context. So context that has enabled us into this work from hybrid culture may become a spoil sport in future. The other one is the style of management. Somewhere you all know McGregor's theory X and theory Y. And typical mindset could be that, okay, when people work from home, do they really work from home? There is always this question mark. Some companies who can monitor your screen time, they pretty much know target oriented. Yes, they know that, okay, you are on target and therefore we can trust you. But otherwise, managers, organizations that will not believe in theory Y style of management, while they want to project that, okay, we are theory Y oriented, but believe me, on practice, I know that there are managers, there are mindset who want to believe in theory X, who want to practice theory X, basically assuming that people don't like to work, they need to be micromanaged, and therefore they need to be right in front of you in office to do that one. So if we carry that mindset in future, then that will be an obstacle to this hybrid mode of working. So I cite these two. One is context, and the other one is the learning.
No, I love it. I think what you're trying to say is, look, we were forced into this. We were not enabled into this. But
Yes.
now that it has been forced on us and behavioral changes have happened, what you don't want to say is the same thing again. We're forgetting the lessons learned and going back to the normal.
True.
Absolutely. So couldn't agree more, and we hope that doesn't happen. It has been a significant learning opportunity for everyone, both at a personal and professional level. We really believe that this should modify behaviors for the future and leave a lasting impact. Turning over, Sujit, it gave you some time to think through what I showed, and while Sachin was responding, so I'm sure you got your thoughts organized on this one. What's your take on the biggest obstacle to a sustainable hybrid work model?
I think all my thoughts were kind of already covered, which is interesting, but I'm going to build on top of that. And I think context is absolutely critical. Okay. And even as we speak, I think Sachin's context in his industry context is different from my context in my industry context, right? For example, we are a technology consulting organization. We focus on digital transformation. But as we go through from a digital transformation standpoint, from a technology consulting services standpoint, the degree of change is not as marked, if I were to put it, from a hybrid standpoint, because we were already ready with virtual training programs, with hybrid training programs, with webinars, which is already in vogue, kind of getting in vogue, not fully there, but already in vogue. But having said that, there were still changes, and I think it's important to touch base upon that when we go through the session. The other context, which I agree with what Sachin was talking about, I think human beings by default, we have enabled, a lot of it is very employee-centric, right? We believe that the employees should take the onus on themselves to learn something new, while we will enable everything and anything that we can, make it available anytime, anywhere, nuggetize it. So those are the structural changes that have happened to the training content. But often, it is, the choices might very well be there, but no decision is taken till there is no choice. Right. So we'll have to work out how really does the organization's mandate kind of coincide with the person's interest and what's in it for me as an individual. That needs to come in together. Otherwise, by default, any learning intervention, learning program, human capital development, all of those programs are going to come to naught without that alignment happening. So that's kind of crucial. Okay. The other thing that I would say is that yes, managers, again, the last point that Sachin talked about, and I'm just kind of indicating something a little different. The guys who are good have already kind of evolved almost immediately within a few days, I would say, of increased collaboration, increased communication, almost like if everyone's aware of what agile is, like a forced agile meeting in the morning or in the evening. They didn't even need to be told, but they were very embracing of any change that has been told. But it was just a simple guidance being given right up front, saying that, these are things that you would need to do slightly differently. You were doing it in a physical setting. Now you would have to do it in a virtual collaborative setting, right? And now it's a distributed mode, completely distributed mode. And we don't even know where if someone says they are in Bangalore, we can only find out whether they are in rural Bangalore or in New Delhi based on their IP. We don't really want to do that, right? But it could be anywhere, and literally it could be in the US as well, and we don't really know where that team exists. But the trust factor getting built is through that social interaction that gets to start almost day one of someone onboarding an organization or on a project or on a team, right? So the core context of learning and the human social element doesn't actually change. I think us as human beings, I mean, we talked about the X and Y factors, but the styles of leadership. But if you look at Maslow's hierarchy, right, social interactions right there in the middle, right? You got your security needs and esteem needs and self-achievement, the self-actualization need, but social is right there. And what we have done is we've taken social out and we just like ripped it apart, right? And we're saying now, without social, go figure out your interaction and let's see what you're doing with it. That actually puts a spanner in the works because human beings are at the end of it. I think the reason why we are even putting on our cameras and looking at each other because we want to be connected in some form, right? That will still continue. I don't think that can go away. And better modes of interaction, of collaboration, of this virtual, physical, communication styles will only increase if you want to make this hybrid hybrid workforce successful, hybrid training program successful. These are necessarily some things that need to come to the forefront. And of course, hopefully, if they work, we should be able to sustain them going forward, not revert back, and go back to where we were around a year ago.
No, great summary. Thanks, Sujit. I think what you're saying is, and if I have to summarize, is that we learned a lot. There are still people working, to Sachin's point, under mindsets, which needs to perhaps still keep evolving and changing, or it would be like an unconscious bias. If you consider that people from home work more from the home or for home than organizations. At the same time, I think you have to give credit to the employers and people. They have let their managers into their houses, their living rooms, their sometimes even bedrooms. They're more vulnerable. They are showing their vulnerability. We need to be cautious how we take this. But all the good things that we have learned, there were a lot of bad things, but there were silver linings. We carried on some good practices. We accelerated digital. Let's continue with that as we evolve into a hybrid workforce. Let's take advantage of both the models and get the best of it. That would be the really the challenge, and obstacles are context, mindsets of people, and as you correctly said, a variety of these things which you have done may be undone if we don't take those learnings from here on.
And I think I was wanting to touch up on that one piece. It's a default setting. It's a hardwire in our brains to be social.
Social part of it. Yeah.
I think that is a big obstacle about it.
Yeah, social being a big obstacle, and how do you ensure people are socially connected while they work remotely? So, great points. So again, we did some, research in terms of, just quick check. Are you able to see my screen?
It's coming. Yeah.
Okay, great. So just wanted to show you the learning report. This is something which came out from a survey that we had done. That's not very important. What is important is HR and L&D thought that, their L&D priorities and challenges, and priorities seem to be more around building skill, capability, defining ROI, improving employee productivity and performance, aligning L&D strategy, developing leadership. But at the same time, challenges were demonstrating the ROI, the lack of interest in employees, the lack of data and insight to take actionable actions, aligning the company's overall strategy to the learning that is happening both informal and formal, and some people just having a small team and small budgets. That was the context. So my question really is, how do you what goals do organizations therefore need to prioritize? And you saw some of the goals out there for the workforce to reskill and upskill. And Sujit, this time we'll start with you.
All right, sure. Actually, I was going to ask you if you could put up the slideshow mode so we can talk about it. What struck me is very interesting is that actually those challenges are the same year on year on year. It is not any different. I don't know if Sachin would agree or disagree there, but I think we have seen the same challenges pretty much every single year. Yeah, sometimes the budget is a little bit more, but it's not, almost always never enough, right? We have always struggled to figure out how to show ROI, and that has not really changed. It's just another mode of doing training and learning and development, and it would still we would still have the same challenge, right? The lack of interest we talked about. I mean, it's the choice is always there, but how do you ensure that what's in it for me kind of comes across and people take it on willingly rather than being forced? So yes, so the challenges, frankly, I think they might have, the weightages might have changed, shifted a little bit here and there, but probably 4 out of the 5 have always been there. I'm just looking at it right now, and I think 4 out of the 5 have always been there ever since. For the last 10 years, I've seen this. So it's really not really changed. Probably demonstrating ROI has maybe become a little bit more exaggerated.
Yeah, because of cost cutting or maybe reduction in revenue. Companies are trying to put their money behind the most important areas. So that could be a bit of
Absolutely. That too. Plus also, I think to make this successful, I think there is one component which is coming across very clearly is that you need to involve technology, new technologies, new partners. You just cannot do it yourself. You do not necessarily have the coverage or the skill set or the competency or the medium to be able to translate it to your to disseminate it to your employee base, right? In the location they are in. So that also is a capital intensive investment that needs to kind of go in, right? And so the ROI probably is a little more aggravated as a requirement now. I think at the same time, I think what is most encouraging is we did a similar study as well ourselves with a lot of industry leaders. And number one in making any company successful in digital transformation, digital evolution, as we call it, is how well their employee base is skilled and ready for embracing digital transformation. So they themselves need to be able to upskill, and organizations recognize that. So yes, the challenge might be in demonstrating ROI, but I don't think budget should be a challenge because they do recognize it as the number one prerogative. Okay, if I were to take the last, I would say the 6-7 months, especially in the IT services industry, it's gone haywire. I mean, pretty much any single person with the skill sets that makes the cut is a gold mine, and we are willing to pay top dollar for it. So why would you not pay top dollar for, or rather a much significantly lower investment per employee, and get them trained and up to speed on those skills as well? So I think that's it is just coming true more than I think there's a little bit of a lag in implementation to seeing that ROI. That's the reason why you're seeing these figures, action figures.
Yeah.
I think we are getting there.
And at the same time, I think people have accelerated their digital journeys, whether in terms of automating various processes at a manufacturing level. There has been a huge focus on automation and manufacturing 4.0, industry 4.0, and so forth. So, Sachin, what's your take on the priorities? Is building skill and capabilities still, you think that's the number one priority for organizations as far as resilience and during this time that you're seeing as well in a manufacturing setup, for example?
Kamal, I mean, that's a rhetoric question. We know that, that's the prime most important factor. And I agree with Sujit. I mean, thank you for showing us this trend, but if you look at it, it has more or less remained the same. And with us specifically, if I have to speak from my own experience, from my own organization's point of view, we don't have any L&D budget as such. We believe in collaboration and co-creation. So if you believe in this mantra and follow this mantra, that you don't start any training or OD intervention if it doesn't make sense to the business. Now, if it makes sense to the business, then obviously, and you involve them in this whole design framework, brainstorming, you are co-creating that model, and obviously they support you in implementation. Why some of the training programs fail is because it's the HR people who think it's a good thing to do, and they want to kind of do it without really checking whether it makes sense to the business or no. And that's the reason that you don't get any implementation support. People come and attend it, but they attend it for the sake of attending. I mean, it's a good thing to do, but ultimately then you struggle to prove ROI on that one. So my own experience is, first is it has to make sense to the business. Two is you collaborate with them, you co-create that design framework with them, and then they support you. In our organization, I can say that there are three sections of people. We always speak about HR. Business people should become the HR people, right? And our job should be to make our job redundant, and that's what I believe in. If I'm in L&D, I'm in HR, how do I make my job redundant? Today, what I'm doing, how can I equip my business managers to do that one so that I can take on something else? Now, we speak about it, but what has happened in our setup is we have one section where really they are the ones who have understood the framework of learning. They are the ones who kind of drive these training programs on their own. We are only there to give that administrative support. Otherwise, they understand the philosophy, they understand the framework, they do it. We believe in technical expertise. That's the basis of creating that relationship of trust with our customers. So they build those programs and they deliver those programs. And we have really less than 10% kind of a intervention there. The other section is where we know that we have to put in a lot of effort. So we get into this co-creation element there. So we have now introduced a lot of excellence programs. And those excellence programs, we thought that if we co-create with those business leaders, then they would support us in this ROI. And third is obviously you keep on building, and we all learn and grow all the time. So we have to invest in creating that growth mindset. If we do that, and I refer to the Potter's model here, typically that model is used for the change management, but I think that there is a great relevance of that model to creating the learning culture also. If we can create that sense of urgency in the individual, if they're aware of the problems that they're facing, at the same time, if they're aware of the solutions, then you are creating that buy-in in this change process. If you don't create that buy-in in the individual at the systemic level, then programs are bound to fail, because they will ask you, what's in it for me? The most heard FM channel in this world is WIIFM. What's in it for me? Indeed, and the moment we miss that, then we are missing the whole point, I think.
Yeah. So Sachin, let me, I just want that there are so many people listening in. You see these priorities, and you're saying that, I agree with you, which is, by the way, that, Sachin, that nothing much has changed. But Sachin, if you had to pick for your audience and say, you know what, and even if it is not in this list, in fact, more so if it is not in this list, what would be your top 3 priorities which you would ask L&D professionals to focus on for 21 in general? I mean, there are organizational goals and alignments and stuff like that, but what are the 3 things that you would advise every L&D professional from your side? Just the 3, top 3.
If I have to speak about one generic program, and I'm not talking then about the business needs and what kind of programs you have to drive, because they are very specific to those kind of business needs. But in general, looking at the learning scenario, I think we don't need content creators within the function now, because so much of content is being created by the experts around the world. Yeah. As I speak, I have myself enrolled into 5 different courses on 5 different platforms, Kamal. So there is no dearth of any good content there. So it has to be consumed. Now, if that is the thing, are we creating consultants, or are we creating people who can contribute to the organizational goal? I can learn, I can gain knowledge, but if that knowledge is not implemented on the ground, then it's of no use. And therefore, I believe that the priority that we should have in our organization is around coaching. Whatever I learn, how can I make it implementable at work? So if I don't get that support on the ground when I am implementing that, then there are chances that I may go back to the original. In my mind, psychologically, I may be satisfied learning so many things, knowing about so many things. But if it is not going to help the organization, then it's of no use. So I will spend a lot of energy and time in creating coaches so that they give that implementation support on the ground when
So
those things are
coaching
additional.
is one priority area that you can look at irrespective of the industry. Peer-to-peer mentoring, coaching, those are all great stuff, and more so in these times. Um, Agree. Sujit, any other leaving thoughts on this topic? I guess we can move on. But other
Yeah.
than that, yeah, sorry.
So I think we touched upon something. Maybe we'll come back to this later. I think hands-on is still something that's not going to go away. When you're virtual, getting that view of what's reality for you in real life, in the context of, again, let's say IT services or technology consulting, or if it is manufacturing, how do you actually get your hands dirty and working with what you just learned is still going to be there. It's not going to go away. And we
So
still
basically, capability demonstration, ability to not only learn but also practice and execute on the ground.
we talk 70, 20, 10, right? That
Yeah.
70 has gone down a whole lot. So how do we get the 70 back up to 70, right? Yes, the 10 and the 20 is good, and they've increased that and made it more efficient. But the 70, I think, again, I think the tech industry has become a little easier because we have got virtual labs. You've got, you can actually do collaborative coding.
Yeah, it's harder to do that in a traditional brick and mortar company.
I
So
think
moving on to that, I'm just interested of time just moving around.
it's good.
Sachin, your take on, so I do agree that to a certain extent, the domain knowledge that your SMEs have is absolutely unique. And at the
Yep.
same time, yes, there could be content available which can be utilized, and one should always try to optimize the two rather than creating. Curating seems to be the buzzword nowadays. So again, Sachin, just top 2 or 3 priorities that you think are the most material for 21 for this year.
So, Kamal, we always spoke about agility as a priority, right? And agility as a word will stay. I mean, even if we are speaking, let's say in 2025, we will still be talking about agility. But important thing is, what have we done about it? Okay. And I will share practically what has happened with us in the last 12, 14 months around this agility theme. When it started, we know that even government was not very clear about, okay, when to bring this lockdown. There was a lot of kind of ambiguity in the environment. So there was the government and local administrative bodies thought process on how do we kind of work on that one. In that setup, we came up with our own level document, which is like level 1 to level 7, saying, okay, depending on the number of cases outside or environment outside, how do we operate as an organization? So that's a level document that was created. Level 1 is nothing no one comes to office. Level 7 is everything is normal and you come to office, and then it builds like that. Level 2 is only manufacturing and shop floor members come. Level 3 is manufacturing shop floor members come along with some of them who are essential to come. So it goes on that like that. So that level document has really helped us understand, okay, when is it that I need to be in office and when is it I can operate from home.
So it's like a rules of engagement or a rule book or a template or a framework, basically.
It is. Now, Kamal, on a broader scale, what has happened because of that level document is that agility, what we speak about, flexibility, coping up with certain changes, that has been built in our members. So we are not working like binary that, okay, you are not coming to office and now suddenly you have to now start coming to office. And now how do I struggle that, navigate that change? With us in last 12, 14 months, it has happened. And we have learned to deal with these changes. we exactly know, okay, how do we manage our work? How do I manage my own learning in that space? So
So is
a
it
lot of,
agility or resilience, or you think it's a combination of both that you're perhaps leaning towards?
you can have, it's a play of words, but I can go with that. But whatever competence we have built in that domain, I think if we can build on that competence further, okay, that's going to give us a great benefit.
So that is your one priority. So anything
Yes.
else other than that that you want to just quickly highlight?
I can say it's something that we failed. You spoke about failure, and we must talk about failures also in this forum. We had introduced a program named reverse mentoring. With the changing demographic, with the workforce becoming younger, India is getting younger. So then, how do we make, so to say, elders and seniors listen to the new generation that is
To new
coming?
generation, yes.
It is not really, it is like creating that balance and then giving the opportunity for the seniors also listen to the youngsters and their ideas. And if even those that workforce, the millennials and Gen Ys who come, they have a great thought process. They are better than you on some of the technological things. So we had tried creating that forum where the typical mentors get into mentee shoes. So we
Reverse
tried
mentoring.
it. We tried. We couldn't get a lot of success there. So now I would want to experiment on that again to build that balance in the system.
Yeah, reverse mentoring, great. Didn't work, but then can be optimized. And it's a great idea. I loved it. Uh, Moving on, in the interest of time, we talked about the goals organization needs. Now, let me shift the focus to the learners and your employees. They are getting a new buzzword every day, right? They read newspapers, you open YouTube, you do this. Somebody's talking about machine learning and AI and data science and artificial intelligence and blockchain, and it's overwhelming to a large extent. At the same time, when I speak to organizations, they tell me that look, from a competitive advantage and resilience and building future, there are these are the 5 6 things, which is big data is important. Data is everything. Database decision making. Mukesh Ambani says data is the new oil, and so on and so forth. You look at AI and predictive analytics and different names, deep learning, machine learning, whatever you call it, predictive algorithms and cognition models, and you know all of that subject is around harnessing the data to build, learn from it and build artificial intelligence algorithms which can be more predict more the behavior, the actions that you need to take, whether in a manufacturing or IT. At the same time, automation, that seems to be the buzzword across the industry, whether it's banking or manufacturing or technology. We also have design thinking, agility comes in there, as you spoke about. And at the same time, there are issues around risk mitigation, regulatory and compliance need, more specific to banking and financial industry, but and pharma industry, but it does impact quite other industries as well. And finally, it's security uh, continues to become an overwhelming issue. We saw headlines during this COVID times around breaches and election process and security being so important, both at a personal and professional level. Data breaches being one of the big issues during this time. So, in this new normal world that we are going towards with hybrid workforce, it's for the learners listening in today. What skills and what are the work that you must ask your workforce to acquire, and which are the existing one that they must build on? So, now just rotating, Sachin, would you like to take a go on this one?
Yeah. So what you shared, Kamal, I mean, if you speak from the digital domain, then I agree with you that a lot of data is being generated. So data-driven decision making is something that we need to really work on for sure. Okay. And the other point that I will say is something that I said in the first point, that how do we build people leaders and the managers to be more like theory Y oriented, where you work more on creating that environment, enabling people to work, and not really getting into the other styles of management. So those are the two things that I would say should work.
Okay. Um, Thanks, Sachin. On the technology side, from a manufacturing, do you think this is one area you want to call out as important to your competitive advantage in the future, whether it's AI, automation, big data,
Yeah,
anything?
sure.
Yeah.
Sure, Kamal. And then we have explored some of the things on AR, VR, MR, and I think they have got great benefits to the industry. I mean, if the virtual world can really come very handy to shift some of our classroom to those, and you can learn anytime, anywhere with those technologies. I see a great benefit of having all these technologies at work.
Great. Sujit, you obviously are from the technology domain, and these are not buzzwords for you. These are your
You said that.
mainstream day-to-day language that you use. What's your thought on your guidance to the people, not only from the tech industry, but even larger? What are the top three things that you would ask L&D professionals from a skilling point of view to think about in those domains that I showed you?
Sure. So Kamal, I think again, what you said and what the context is absolutely based on the industry and the work that you are, sector you are in, right? So whatever you showed there is very relevant to me and my people, as an example. So let's keep that as the technology competency that is needed for us to survive as an organization itself. So each of our practices would have a competency framework and a matrix kind of defined to say, you start with a certain proficiency in a certain skill and you keep going up a step ladder form. That's already predefined. I don't want to harp on that. These all fall in that same bucket. Now, new evolving areas come in as inputs from the business side, especially from the sales and client partners, as we call it. They have a ear to the ground as to what's happening as well. So that's another element. The delivery teams have an element of what needs to be happening. So those all kind of tie into these competency frameworks. But above and beyond that, I think the softer aspect for a technology company is far more important. Much as I hate to say it, the resilience, mental health, well-being, infosec, these are not going to go away. These are baseline programs now. They have to be there, right? And we have to keep teaching our managers and including our L&D team itself as to how do you build trust, how do you collaborate virtually, how do you structure workloads without overwhelming yourself and your teams, right? So these are things that are going to come in regardless, and they will be there.
Those are power skills, time management and communication and persuasiveness and problem solving, etc.
Correct. In the context of a hybrid workforce, I think they change. And also how you do things change. For example, many of us as initially, in the first 2 to 3 months, we all enjoyed working from home to a degree. But then we started learning that we were actually working more hours, simply put. But we had to unlearn that and kind of come back towards normalcy of instead of a 9 hour, it became a 10 hours instead of the 14 hours it was earlier. So we have to learn doing that and practice doing it. So you can't. And we as HR leaders and L&D leaders, we have to set the bar as well. By the way, sorry to say that, no pressure at all. I know I am guilty of sending emails at 11 p.m., 1 a.m., and that sets wrong precedents. So we got to learn ourselves as well as to how do we set boundaries for not just ourselves, for our teams, and make sure that.
Sure. Hey, look, there is one narrative which says every business is a software business. I think different people have made different comments, like every business is digital business, but I really believe that every business is becoming or will become a software business in many ways, right? Even if you're in manufacturing or you run a bank or a pharma company.
A little further, I will go that it will become.
I mean, Mercedes-Benz has more line of codes than Android operating system. So I mean, I can go on, and I love technology, so I can go on that. But the basic essence is, yes, technology is important, but to your point, focus also on the soft skill that goes with the technology, those are more lasting,
I was going to say that
more permanent.
technology is important. People are more important. I mean, I'm the HR guy, so I have to say that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, to your point, and love that for that. Hey, look, we are running out of time, so I need to accelerate here a little bit. So I'll go to the last question. Really, during this time, we discussed what is important, what is things, but when you think about transformation for the hybrid workplace, and this is the last one, um, I think it makes sense to create a framework, Sachin, as you call it, or maybe a roadmap, for your hybrid workforce, which is a mix, as you discussed, between technology, so that they are relevant as employees, that they evolve their roles and learnings as things move on, but at the same time continue to focus on those soft power skills which are lasting, from that side. So when you think about developing such a roadmap, um, what would be your guidance to the L&D team, and what has been your experience of what kind of design criterias have you kept in mind while creating such kind of a roadmap? Because people are today, and let me again take a moment to share my screen for context again, so that you can get it, the learning experience platform or immersive, etc. So these are things which people are looking at today. From a L&D road, building an L&D roadmap and crafting a roadmap for upskilling a hybrid workflows. Look, we want a 2-minute answer, which says basically which are the ones that you think is really important to keep in mind. Just to the point.
So if we are talking about creating that roadmap, Kamal, I follow one principle. Engineering background helps me in this one. Just like before designing any product, what do? You go to a customer, understand the needs, convert that into technical specifications, and you use all your HR jargons there, right? So first is go to your customers, internal customers, understand from them, involve them in the design process, create a co-centric design, and that will that will definitely be a success. So that's a simple answer I will say. Perfect. Whenever you have to talk about creating a road.
Yeah. No, I want to accelerate so that you can take some audience question. Sujit,
so I'll
take on this.
I'll take the same thing. It's top down. You get strategic alignment to business. Where are they heading? What do you want to do about it? Map out learning journeys for your teams, and that will translate into individual capabilities, individual competencies, both soft and technology oriented. But if you go bottom up, start with the first contact that happens. You need to have high impact onboarding itself, because you need to start building trust. Because right now, people who are coming in new to our organization don't even know who you are. They don't have any context of what you're doing. There's no bonding whatsoever. So I think there was a question around that. So I'm kind of tying it to that. That starts from there. Then have the learning pathways that are kind of defined for them. Make sure that there is some kind of a hands-on coming into the training program. The mode of how you're doing it is going to be very important. And by default, I think you are going to have systems of various learning technology applications, whether it is your LEP, LXP, whatever you want to call it, LMS. I mean, there's just so many terminologies right now. AR, VR will.
So excellent. Thank you so much. So what I would like to do is, we have about 10 minutes plus, but Abid, you want to take some quick 2-3 questions from the audience?
Thank you so much, Kamal. First question is coming to your way, Sujit. First question is for you. How does virtual hybrid work style impact employee and team bonding? And what are the interventions used to manage this?
I think I just touched upon one of them. It starts right from day one. I mean, including during the talent acquisition phase itself, we have a problem right there. Right? You don't really get to see face-to-face what's happening. The micro body language that you typically are attuned to doesn't count anymore. So how do you start impacting a good decision based on that? Does it impact? First of all, yes, I think the impact is rather significant. And I think the people who are really good at it, especially managers and the team members who operate well with each other, they will continue to do so irrespective of whether they're physically located or not, because that bond has already been created. It's when a new bond has to be created that this problem starts getting aggravated. So again, there are a multitude of ways how you manage it. Like first things first, is, you have, when the onboarding happens, make sure that the interactions are fun. It's more social. You're getting to understand who they are as a person, while you are telling them about the vision of the organization and of the team that they're going to come into and the project that they're coming into. Take time out to take a break, a social break, a virtual coffee session or a virtual water cooler break, if you will. All of those conversations help. Business will continue. We will continue to do business, but unless you are knowing the context again of or the perception that a person comes in with to the organization, it's going to be extremely difficult to build a bond. And I think, like I said, you have to set an example yourself as a HR leader. So when someone new comes in, are you interacting with them? Are you, touching base as a manager on a daily basis or on a bi-daily basis, whichever way, whatever works for you, right? But making that connect is extremely important. Understanding the personal nuance and the employee's view is what's in it for me. From the employee's view is also very important, and that's what helps.
The next question is for Sachin. A very personal question to you. What kind of courses would you recommend that an HR professional should take up? Soumya is asking this question, and she's with someone 10 years of HR experience.
I will tell you what is enticing me nowadays. I am fascinated by the latest research on neuroscience. And the more I learn, the more I think want to learn in this space. So the 4 or 5 courses that I'm enrolled onto right now, 3 of them belong to neuroscience. And believe you me that sometimes HR also ends up speaking commonsensical language, and therefore you are not able to kind of put the HR agenda forward very clearly from the theoretical framework perspective. So I think if you can learn neuroscience, that would be much better, and it will not only help you as a person, but also the others who are dealing with you. So my recommendation would be on neuroscience.
Thank you so much, Sachin. Thanks for your quick reply. Mr. Datta, we have a question for you, and I think you must have answered this multiple times, but one more time for our viewers. ROI on learning is very difficult to define. What will be the best way to demonstrate this?
Okay. So, yeah, ROI, the best way to demonstrate is to define what are the KPIs that you need, what are the metrics that you measure, putting those metrics together, and then using an industry standard ROI calculator. I can speak for Skillsoft, which has a ROI calculator we built globally with an Indian organization. It's a standard framework and model. You just input your employee salaries, roles, etc., and then capture the data from the system and together put it together to develop a ROI tool. So we do it like that, but I believe the general answer would be KPIs, metrics, measuring it, aligning it to the cost, and then showing the ROI in terms of benefits. I mean, pretty much that's how it goes.
Thanks a lot. Coming back to Sachin once again. Sachin, you rightly pointed out about the importance of coaching in workspace. How do we train managers to be a coach when it doesn't come naturally to them? The question is from Kiran.
Something that doesn't come, they say in the coaching conversation, don't coach someone who doesn't want to be coached. Okay. So that's the first fundamental rule. So if one is absolutely aware that this is not my space, then don't get into. But if you are only kind of speculating, then try it. There are many good courses around that help you with a framework. ICF is there. Otherwise, there are other models also. You can definitely go through it. And if at the end of the course, if you think that you are not cut out for them, then don't do it. But in my experience, everyone has a potential. And if you can just get into that space of, I don't know, and you kind of take a step forward and say, okay, I know that I don't know. That's how learning happens. So just help them with a good course and let them kind of self-assess them at the end of the day.
So there's one more question for you, Sujit. Why are leaders ineffective in handling mental health of human capital within organizations? Does L&D, skilling, upskilling, or reskilling play an effective role here? What are your thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. I think, like I said, HR has a huge role to play, and I think we have to show the path as well. Leaders have to show the path as well. But the style of leadership has changed. Social structures have fractured. The number of echelons or strata within an organization have kind of flattened because no one really knows who's best is really some kid out there somewhere, right? And in a specific technology area, as an example. So he's the leader at that point of time.
Yep.
So we, as just because of the gray hair doesn't mean, yes, we have the experience, doesn't necessarily mean it will translate into empathy, right? Having said that, teaching empathy is harder than it looks. It's not easy to inculcate empathy in someone else. You can try, you can show the way, you can practice it, and yes, there are training programs, of course, saying here's unconscious bias, don't do things like this. But up to practicing it, I think it comes straight top down. Once the top leaders show it, automatically the rest of the organization starts to follow. And I'm seeing that in action at our end as well. The CEO sends just a simple message saying we are in support of our employees for whatever you're going through. That percolates down to directors, managers, and so on, and that's what starts the ball rolling in getting empathy going, as an example.
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask one question to Mr. Datta, but I've seen he has answered some of the questions live. So I will redirect this question to Sachin.
I think, Abid, there is one question I thought I'll just quickly answer.
Yes,
this is regarding mental health of
yeah. Please go ahead. I just asked this question. Yeah, you can add.
Yeah. So the question is really, does L&D and skill and reskilling play an effective role? I think it does. First of all, mental health, one has to first create the level of awareness, not only as to which tools and resources, but how to spot, how to identify, what are the remedies, how do you mitigate. So those are all awareness related part of it. And then you can go to some level of enforcement, working on life balance, work-life balance, enforcing to certain extent certain mandatory breaks or certain behavioral changes that you would like to see from managers maybe. I can give one example. Based on feedback, I told my team that you may decide not to switch on your video cameras in our meetings if you feel like, and if you don't feel like, don't switch it on. So there could be small tweaks and behavioral changes which can play a very effective role in mental health, because that's a big topic by itself nowadays.
Yeah, so most organizations also will have an EAP program as well. So that kind of using once they
Okay, thank you so much. This will be our last questions. We are getting a couple of questions, but I'm so sorry. We are running out of very quickly. Sachin, coming back to you. The question is, as a tech organization, most of the learning happens on the job and through collaborations. How do you take these employees to online learning mode and keep them engaged?
I think the content itself has to be good enough to drive that engagement, right? To entice learners to come to it. The content has to be well laid, well designed, so that once they are on it, then the law of diminishing utility, marginal utility doesn't come in. It is good enough for you to kind of keep your interest throughout the course. So it is really up to the content. And we learned, I'm sure the one who is asking question can connect me later on. I have my own experience to share how we struggled initially to kind of get learners on the online content. Kamal has been a part of that journey, but later on, I think the way we are today tells a success story. So, would like to chat with the person offline.
Add on there. I think there are now ample ways that you can break out groups and have them set up already, and then there is virtual labs that they can actually collaborate. Right. So there's a lot of technologies out there to help enable that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Nage. Thank you so much, Mr. Sahu, and thank you so much, Mr. Datta. And thanks to all the viewers who have participated in this webinar. Do read our stories and subscribe to our newsletter for all the latest update on people and work. And we'll see you again. Thank you. Thanks a lot.